Good morning. This is Pastor Allen from the Garrison Church of God. I'm so glad that you've chose to join us this morning. I do have one announcement I'd like to make to you about activities at our church this coming week. We will be having a celebration of life service on Thursday in honor of my dad, and we invite you to be a part of that. That will be at 10:30 on Thursday morning. We come to this last message in this particular series of sermons that I've been sharing. I've been talking to you about living in a relative world and the concepts that Christians need. I've been dancing around one subject that is important in this area of living in a chaotic world. The one subject is the issue of integrity. We don't often talk about that in Christian circles. We don't talk about the importance of integrity, but integrity is central to the very thinking of Christianity and to our Christian worldview. I want to take time to look at two characters that lived during the time of Judges. Their names were Boaz and Ruth. It is my belief, having looked very carefully at the construction of the book of Judges and the book of Ruth and the events of those times, that probably they lived, or the event that is described took place sometime around the year 1160 BC. During the conspiracy of Abimelech, Gideon's son. It was a time of unbelievable chaos. The book of Judges identifies this particular time in a very interesting manner. It talks about this world as being a place of relativism, in the sense that every person did what they thought was right because there was no ruling authority or king in Israel. That becomes a theme from this point on in the book of Judges. The people of Israel after the time of Gideon were separated in a lot of different ways. Their natural tribal inclinations, because each tribe of Israel, each of the 12 tribes, had a different land area that they had settled in. Though the realities of that land, or geography, if you will, dictated to some extent their interests as a people, but also their inclinations due to the geopolitical realities that took place at the close of the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age collapsed about the time of Gideon. It was a time of complete and total chaos. There were no major ruling powers in the world to hold down the chaos. There was no Egypt that could assert its power and authority in the Mediterranean basin. There was no Hittite empire any longer. There was no Assyrian empire that could force its will on the chaos that was coming directly into their world. There was no Crete that had ruled the Mediterranean. There was no concept of anybody that had control of what was going on. The world was spinning away in chaos. Israel itself found deep divisions within its own nation. To the east of the Jordan, the tribes there began to view themselves as distinct and different, as separate to some extent from the rest of Israel. Their interests were, of course, some agriculture, but primarily they were livestock, into livestock and care of livestock, and into control of the trade routes that crossed their territory. For the people of northern Israel on the west side of the bank, they had evidently grown into supplying mercenaries. Mercenaries were big business in this time of chaos because continual warfare dominated the culture. And so the tribes in the northern part of Israel began selling the services of their young men for military work and service, as well as trade and other issues and some agriculture. Judah and Simeon, who were the tribes of the south, their primary interest, again, was livestock, some agriculture. However, trade routes, there weren't a lot of trade routes through their territory. So they were dominated primarily by rural concerns. These things pulled the tribes apart. The major powers in their world at the time were the Philistines to the west, the Moabites and the Ammonites to the east. And we see those divisions. It says in Judges chapter 10 that the people of Israel began at this time to worship the gods of the Philistines, the Ammonites, and the Moabites. It is easy to see in this kind of a world how the situation that is described in the book of Ruth would take place. Elimelech, with his sons Mahlon and Chilion and his wife Naomi, migrate to the only stable power at the time in the world that they lived in, and that was Moab. It is possible and probably likely that Elimelech was either an artisan or he was a merchant. The reason we can believe this is because he was able to obtain two young women from families that were established in Moab for his two sons. That would not have been possible had he not been a man of at least some substance or earning potential. And so that tells us a little bit about the world in which they lived. Mahlon and Chilion and Elimelech die suddenly, evidently within less than a month of one another. We do not know the reason for their death. It may have been some type of plague. It may have been due to military service, or it might have been to unrest within the Moabite culture. We certainly don't understand what happened, but we do know that it left Naomi and her daughters-in-law without any type of support or protective structure. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem, where she had grown up and where she and Elimelech had met and where they had given birth to their sons. Now she goes home destitute. She sends one of her daughters-in-law home to her own family. She tries to send her other daughter-in-law, Ruth, Mahlon's wife, back to her family, but Ruth refuses. She decides that she is going to commit herself to Naomi, and she is going to commit herself to the God of Israel. This will be a strange set of circumstances that will try the integrity of Ruth and will also challenge the integrity of the man Boaz. When they arrive back, Boaz is a wealthy, powerful landowner, known for his personal integrity, living in the area of Bethlehem. Ruth is a landless Moabite woman who has returned with her mother-in-law, who is still trying to learn the culture and the language of this new society and to learn what it means to be a person of faith in the Israelite community. It is her integrity that impresses the man Boaz. He is much her senior, and yet he is impressed by her level-headedness, her strong work ethic, her courage, and her perspective in life. It is something that draws him to her personally. It will revolutionize their world, and through their integrity, revolutionize the world that the Israelite people know. In fact, it is their great-grandson who will unify the people of Israel into a mighty nation, a nation that is able to conquer its enemies. Both the Philistines, the Ammonites, and the Moabites will eventually be conquered through David and through his predecessors. It is powerful to realize that we as Christians do not understand the depth or the importance of integrity, especially at a time of chaos. When we look at integrity in its wholeness, it comes from a Latin root into our language, but the basis or the root of the word integrity is the root tag or teg. It comes to us from the ancient Indo-European language. We don't know what that was, but the closest language to it is Sanskrit. And Sanskrit has this word meaning thick or consistent. And the concept was of integrity is to be mixed to a consistency or thickness that is stable. So we as Christians are looking for the concept of being men and women of integrity, having a solidness to our character. Now, we often talk about integrity with the concept of honesty, but integrity is far more than just honesty. Integrity involves several different ideas. It involves honesty, humility, fidelity, perspective, self-control, endurance, and fairness. These things are what make up integrity. In isolation, any of these characteristics can become destructive. As a result, they need to become homogenized together. And that is what integrity does in our lives. It homogenizes these principles or ideas and works them out in our lives. Now, if you know anything about vinegar and oil, they're the basis of almost all salad dressings. They separate quite easily when they're mixed. The only way to keep them in suspension together is to homogenize them by whipping them very thoroughly together and then adding some type of a binding agent, either a protein such as egg or a starch or some other type of additive that will bind the elements together and keep them in suspension. That is what faith and courage do with these characteristics. They bind them together and homogenize them so that they become something unique and powerful that can change a world. The chaos of the world would swirl around Boaz and Ruth, and yet because of their personal integrity, they were able to work their way through the chaos and eventually provide a basis for a future. The Apostle Peter, in his second letter in the first chapter, talks about these concepts and challenges the Christians that he is writing to live out integrity. He doesn't use that word, but the principles that he lays down are the foundation of integrity, and he talks about adding them to each other, in a sense homogenizing them within our personal character. And so that is what we need as Christians, to homogenize these things and create character. I hope I'll see you in church today. God bless you. Thank you for listening.